Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Kristen Lloyd, Director for the Sowell Family Collection in Literature, Community, and the Natural World. For those of you who haven't joined us before, the Sowell Collection is a literary archive documenting the work and lives of contemporary American writers working on issues of place, community, environment, science, spirituality, and the intersection of all these things. Tonight we are joined by Emily Grandy, winner of the 2025 Sowell Emerging Writers Prize. The Sowell Collection, in partnership with Texas Tech University Press and Terrain.org, established the prize in 2022 to support the work of early career writers and to invite them into the Sowell community. Winners receive $1,000, publication with TTU Press, and a residency at the Lopez Cottage on the McKenzie, organized by the Spring Creek Project. A few quick reminders before I introduce Emily and Cupido Cupido. During the reading, please keep your microphones muted. And if you feel comfortable doing so, please turn on your cameras to help us create a sense of community. When we open for audience questions, you can type them into the chat box or you can unmute and just ask away. And finally, the Sowell Collection reserves all rights to this recording, and this program cannot be recorded without express permission. Okay, so our guest tonight is Emily Grandy. She is the author of 2 novels, Cupido Cupido and Michikusa House. Her writing has been awarded the Sowell Emerging Writers Prize, the Landmark Prize, the Silver Nautilus Book Award. It was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize and has been longlisted for the Edna Ferber Book Award. With a background in clinical research, her writing tends to blend science with storytelling, but above all, she aims to address social and environmental injustice. She lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Emily will read tonight from her second novel. Cupido Cupido begins with Ignatius A. Gerard's banishment to his grandfather's Kentucky farm for the summer, where he makes 2 bewildering discoveries. The first is a bundle of decades-old letters written in a language he can't decipher, and the second is a small population of secretive ground-dwelling birds thought to have gone extinct in the 1930s. Blending dry humor with emotional depth, Cupido Cupido navigates family estrangement. Ooh, sorry. Cupido Cupido navigates family estrangement, cultural inheritance, and the complex act of growing up. As Egg wrestles with questions of identity and legacy, the farm becomes a place of unlikely discoveries about the people who raised him, the profound weight of their shared histories, and the unspoken ways love persists through distance and time. Please welcome the wonderful Emily Grandy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kristen. Really excited that you all are here tonight. I will be reading for about 20 minutes from the prologue and a little bit into the first chapter of this novel.
Emily, you're muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I will be reading from the prologue and first chapter, and then we'll open for questions. Even from a distance, Ignatius Egg Gerard could tell he was about to receive bad news. His mother stood waiting for him on the porch, which was alarming enough. But more than that, it was the cross of her arms, protective rather than confrontational. Without meaning to, he stopped pedaling, allowing the second-hand road bike he had repaired in advance of this sacred day, the first of summer vacation, to propel him forward. "Hey, your mom's home," said Jay, coasting beside him, a slant of surprise in his voice. "Yeah, guess so." Egg straightened, using the faded beach towel draped over his shoulders to brush wet hair from his eyes as if to ensure they had not been deceived. The 2 boys pedaled past cars parallel parked along the narrow one-way street. Egg's mom saw them coming and raised a hand to shoulder height, then tucked her chin-length black hair behind an ear free of adornment. She was still in her work blouse, but had changed into the loose-fitting chinos she preferred, rolled at the ankle. The boys left their bikes leaning against one another, against the side of the house. "Hey, Pearl," Jay said, taking the front steps 2 at a time. Both boys at 16 stood a full head above her. "Hi, Sujay," she said, offering an odd, sad smile. Sensing there was going to be a talk, Jay slipped past and went inside his family's half of the duplex. Where were you today? She asked Egg, as if his dripping hair and swim trunks weren't enough of a clue. Woodbine Beach? I wish you'd wear your helmet. The beach was all of 10 minutes from their home in Toronto's Leslieville neighborhood, 5 if he pedaled fast and made all the lights. Aren't you supposed to be in Ottawa till tomorrow? He asked. The question came out sounding like an accusation. After the divorce, after Egg and his mom moved into the unit next to Jay's family, she had promised to look for work that would let her stay home more often. Months passed and nothing changed. Eventually, the hope of an alternative lifestyle had petered out. I left the conference early. I texted you. She held open the front door and they went inside. Her travel case sat at the bottom of the stairs waiting to be unpacked. Egg headed for the kitchen, sensing his mom behind him, lugging whatever burden she was about to unload. He buried his head in the fridge. Whatever she had to say, he didn't want to hear it. Between the divorce, the move, his dad remarrying, not to mention everything at school with Coach and the other parents, Egg had breathed enough bad air this past year to last him into his 30s. My brother called, his mom began, loud enough to be heard over the old buzzing refrigerator. He said Opa broke his arm. Yesterday, 2 days ago, Ag emerged gripping a sports drink. What? How? Opa, his grandfather, was over 80 years old. An injury like that at his age. A radial fracture, apparently. Paul said it was an accident. Something happened in the workshop, but Opa wouldn't say. Is he okay? Yeah, he's fine, honey. Paul said he even drove himself to the hospital. Naturally, I mean, he's up there by himself on that hilltop. She propped herself against the counter, looking tired. I knew something would happen. Something like this was bound to happen. I've been saying it for years. It's just a matter of time. She swore in Bahasa, in Indonesian, thinking he didn't know what it meant. Really, though, Egg didn't want to talk about his grandfather, a man he hardly knew and hadn't seen in 10 years, not since Oma, his grandmother, died. Egg had been 6 at the time, and all he remembered of the event was the reception after the funeral, all the adults he didn't know. He sank into a chair, pressing the unopened sports drink between his palms. Outside, one of their neighbors started up a lawnmower. We're thinking this will be Opa's last year on the farm. After a solemn beat, she said, Egg, Opa could really use your help this summer. What? He almost laughed, but saw she was serious. Wait, hold on. You don't mean like the whole summer? I've got no, come on. Egg, listen, you're the one who left America to get away from him. Why do I have to go? We have to get the place ready to sell. Paul thinks we'll have a buyer by the end of summer, or at least a better idea of what to do with the property. He's talked to real estate agents. What about Grace or Uncle Paul or Aunt Carly? They live there. They live right there. Why can't they do it? Egg's mom sighed. Well, apparently Grace is taking classes for college credit over the summer, and Paul and Carly can't drive out all the time. You know that. They both work. The farm's over an hour from their place, and from what they've said, I think it's in pretty bad shape. The house will have to be cleaned up, the shop will have to be emptied, plus Opa will need help doing the farm work, assuming it hasn't gone completely wild, since you probably don't remember what it's like, but running a farm, it's like raising a spoiled child. It takes everything you have and then some. I honestly don't know how he's managed it all by himself. You're not really selling me on the idea. Paul offered to pay you rather than hire out the work. Besides, it'll probably be the last time you get to see the place, she tried. But what about Sujay? We're supposed to go camping, and I was going to help with his blog this summer doing illustrations. You don't even like camping. Besides, you could bring your art stuff down to Opa's. It's Kentucky, not the moon. Okay, but Mrs. Kumar, remember? She said she'd pay Jay and me to wash dishes or whatever at the restaurant. I think best friends and their mothers understand if you explain you're helping out an elderly family member who's hurt himself very badly. Yeah, well, nothing like a guilt trip. It would be good for you, Egg, to get away for a bit. She said it like a question, a suggestion. After all that business with Coach last semester. It's fine, Mom. I'll do it. It's fine. Thanks, honey. She patted his shoulder on her way to the washroom. From down the hall, she said, I'll let Paul know. On the porch later that evening, their usual hangout, Egg shared the bad news with Jay, who summed it up best. Wow, that sucks, man. Yeah, Egg agreed. It wasn't quite dark yet, and the kids were still out riding their scooters up and down the block, shrieking with delight. So much for the camping trip. Egg's head fell backwards. He sighed, picturing all those spacious summer afternoons erased from his calendar. I'll still do the illustrations, he said, for the blog. He needed something to look forward to. Yeah, that'd be cool. Now that I've got like 1,000 subscribers, I really need to give it a facelift, you know? For sure, Egg said, trying to sound enthusiastic. I didn't even know he was still alive. Your grandpa, I mean, you've like never gone to see him, right? My mom doesn't talk to him anymore. How come? Egg shrugged. Parents, I guess. Jay nodded, understanding. She gonna let you get your license before you go? Egg had the urge to throw something, but there was nothing apart from wicker furniture within arm's reach. Nope. She doesn't want me driving while I'm down there. She says Americans are nuts on the road, and I'd end up getting myself killed. She's repping at some medical conference in New Orleans and all next week, so she booked a layover in Lexington so she can drive me from the airport. Egg had explained that if she let him get his driver's license, she wouldn't have to bother stopping. She'd said, "Nice try." Guess you'll have to start running again if you want to get anywhere on your own, Jay reasoned. I didn't want to do track in the first place. That was my dad's. Dude, seriously? I'm messing with you. Of course he was. Jay knew the whole story, from sad start to sorry, sordid finish. They lapsed into silence for a while. Jay responded to a text from someone, then said, "So you'll be gone till August unless they sell the house sooner, right?" "I guess so." "There's your solution then," he said, sounding triumphant. "What do you mean?" "You just gotta make that house look appealing as hell," Jay declared. "Then somebody dreaming of the country life will move in and you can hightail it out of there." As far as plans went, it wasn't the worst he'd heard that day. Not by a long shot. Chapter 1. At Pearson International, passports in hand, Egg and his mother boarded a plane bound for the Bluegrass State. On American soil, they collected their rented Toyota and headed northwest out of Lexington. This route ushered them through a parcel of the renowned horse country, home to multi-million-dollar operations that produce sleek thoroughbreds for racetracks and stables the world over. But this was not their final stop. As the lonesome blue hills rolled on, displays of obvious wealth retreated by degrees. Hand-laid stone walls and horse fences were replaced by sagging lines of washing. Ancient wooden barns heaved under the weight of their roofs. Trailer homes mounted on cinder blocks were encircled by muddy dog pens and pastures grazed down to compacted earth. Soiled sofas, foaming at the seams, bedecked front porches. Egg's mom barely spoke, her attention laser-focused on the winding roads and the supersized pickup trucks that passed near enough to feel the pressure wave build and subside. The further on they drove, the narrower the roads became. First, abandoning the narrow strip of shoulder, then the center line, as if funneling them toward their destination. Egg slouched in the passenger seat, peeved by the lack of cell phone signal and the ludicrous plan he had agreed to, one that would absorb his entire summer vacation in an abyss of tedious chores. He heard his mom say something over the thumping track he was listening to and turned up the volume. She tugged his headphones off. "Hey!" "Egg, listen to me. I know Opa can be difficult. Trust me, I know. And I know it's my fault you have such a bad impression of him. Still, I want you to be nice, okay? You've been pretty grouchy ever since we left." Someone married a Canadian and left the country because of Opa, and it wasn't me," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Just think, you'll be helping take care of the chickens again, like when we'd visit when you were little. You loved that, collecting the eggs every morning. Remember?" "Not really." They turned onto a dirt track just wide enough for a single car. Now his mom was sitting in the sun, looking hot and uncomfortable in her work clothes. She tipped her sunglasses onto her nose and cranked up the AC. The vents blew cold air in his face. "Here we are," she said. Ahead, a rough gravel drive wound its way up one of the tallest hills in the viewable distance. From its base, he couldn't see the house at the top. The distance across the scrubby pastures, clusters of trees, and a single sweeping power line prevented a clearer view. His mom eased forward, cutting the wheel sharply to avoid potholes. Two filthy, fawn-colored cows stood near the fence line chewing their cud, eyeing the vehicle's progress with bored indifference. Even in first gear, the car skidded perilously on the steep incline and loose stones. The slow pace was intolerable. By the time the house came into view, Egg had sunk so low in his seat he could see only the roofline through the window. Outside, a dog barked. "Looks like he got a dog," said his mom, stepping out. Egg followed, squinting into a slap of sunlight. The sizzling heat and deafening sound of cicadas felt unfamiliar and unpleasant. His mom popped the trunk in with a strength that defied her size, or rather spoke to her trade, of hauling padded cases full of sophisticated and unthinkably expensive medical equipment across continents, lifted out his suitcase. Egg had dedicated the majority of its volume not to clothes, but to sketchbooks, paints, brushes, pens, pencils, both colored and lead, plus a portable scanner, his laptop, and all its essential accessories. His backpack, which he hauled from the back seat, had been reserved for the art books he couldn't live without, collections of his favorite illustrators' work. With the weight of masters like Jean Giraud, Hiromasa Ogura, Toshihiro Mitsutani, Alan Lee, and Shinji Kimura on his shoulders, combined with the sweltering heat, the fast food lunch in his stomach became a greasy puddle of indigestible waste. He considered throwing up. "I don't see him," Mom said. Egg wiped his already dripping forehead. They had parked directly in front of the house. If Opa was inside, there was no way he had failed to see them. The driveway continued further on and would eventually loop past the barn and workshop, skirting the pond before heading back around behind the house, then down the hill again. After doing a full turn, Egg's eyes came to rest on the dog tethered to the porch by a long lead. The dog's fur was mottled gray with patches of black, and in spite of its barking, it seemed friendly, more a greeting than a defensive vocalization. "All right, Egg, give me a hug. Better hurry or I'll miss my flight. Tell Opa I said hi." Obediently, Egg draped an arm over her shoulder, then rested his chin on top of her head. He had inherited his mother's Pacific Islander coloring, but took after his French-Canadian father in other respects. He got his height, for one thing, that and his tapered jawline and nose. Hopefully not his uncompromising disposition, though. He could do without that. "I'll call you tonight," Mom said. "Love you, Egg." She climbed in, started the engine, then rolled down the window to wave goodbye. The dog barked until the car was out of sight, then retreated to its water bowl. In the quiet that followed, a rooster crowed, and a couple of hens clucked in response. Egg was left standing alone with his suitcase, his lead-weight backpack tugging at one shoulder. Sujay's favorite show was a reality TV program where solo contestants tried to survive the oncoming winter in the Canadian wilderness. He got off on that kind of thing, all that bushcraft survivalist business, and had made Egg watch 3 seasons with him. Contestants often described the debilitating moment after setting down, alone in the remote tundra, as drop shock, disoriented, confused, aimless. Without a stable phone signal, the familiar rumbling of cars, airplanes roaring overhead, or pedestrians squawking into phones, Egg could certainly relate. For lack of anything better to do, he hauled his luggage onto the porch. The dog hurried over, wagging its almost tailless butt. Egg knelt and held out his fist. The dog nosed it, eager for the affection. "Oi, oi, oi!" The shout from behind startled Egg so badly he nearly toppled over. He rose, spinning to face the old man tottering toward him across the grass, right arm in a cast and sling, a withered cigarette pinched between his teeth. His grandfather was as thin as the wooden posts lining the driveway and equally friendly looking. A narrow, dry stick of a man, face as hard as bark. "Pearl already gone?" he asked. "Hi, Opa," Egg said tentatively. The stained denim overalls seemed more familiar than the man wearing them. "She had to catch a flight. She said to say hi, though." "She still call you Egg?" "Mom does, yeah, but speak up." "Mom calls me Egg," he said, louder this time, "but I prefer—" "Fine, I call you Egg. Come inside. Air conditioning." Egg shouldered his weighty backpack and gave the dog one last pat before wheeling his suitcase inside the house. He thought about asking Opa whether they could bring the dog inside, too, as a kind of friendly buffer, but his grandfather was already out of earshot. As Egg shut the door behind him, his skin went from sweaty and salty to goose pimpled, an effect that reminded him of reaching inside the ice cream cooler at the bodega near their duplex. No shoes in house, Opa called from somewhere inside. Egg kicked off his unlaced Nikes and followed the sound of his grandfather's voice. He found the old man in the kitchen. Opa's house, or rather the scent of it, spicy and earthy, struck a familiar note in Egg's memory. It was made of solid stone, more like boulders, really, cemented together in thick wooden beams, as though the house had sprouted straight from the earth. Opa built it himself. That's what his mom said, and Egg believed her. No normal architect would design a house this way. Thanks to the number of additions tacked on over the years, the home was a mishmash of incongruous rooms. Egg gazed upward. Two balconies, one on top of the other, overlooked the combined kitchen and living room. Over each railing hung bouquets of clothes, twisted sheets, wet towels, and faded blankets. Floor-to-ceiling windows smudged with hazy dog nose prints overlooked the porch, the scrubby hills, and forested valley beyond. Undoubtedly, some buyer would kill for that view. The thought gave him hope. Egg tried imagining the place redecorated. It wasn't hard to do. Minus the practical, wear-worn decor, only subtle hints at others having once lived here remained, small testaments to those who'd moved on. A heavy black Bible sat on the end table next to a sagging couch. A funeral portrait of his grandmother was the only photograph in sight. A few trinkets that might have belonged to her lined a built-in shelf that ran along the ceiling. Egg sat down at the table, spinning a carved wooden coaster across its surface while his grandfather shuffled around the kitchen, clattering plates and cutlery. In an attempt at amiability, Egg asked, "What's your dog's name?" From where he stood, he could see the animal dozing on the porch, its fur ruffling in a light breeze. Opa sniffed loudly, dropped his cigarette in a used cup, then hacked into the sink. "Your Ibu, she feed you?" It took a moment to process the question, the unfamiliar word. Even after 50, 60 years in America, Opa evidently still peppered in Indonesian vocabulary. We had lunch in the car, he answered. Opa appeared to register this, then proceeded to fix himself a sandwich using his one good arm. Egg almost offered to help, but didn't want to imply that he was now his grandfather's caregiver. The old man ate standing up, mustard smeared at the corner of his mouth. When he finished, he dusted the cutting board over the sink, then left without saying another word. "No, I'll show you to your room," or even, "Here's the mop and bucket." It hardly mattered. Egg knew where he would be staying. His mom's old bedroom was on the top floor, the third floor, he remembered that much. He shouldered his backpack, then lugged his suitcase up the oddly winding steps, trying not to bash it into the walls and railings. But the room had been converted to storage. It was so full of old junk that the single twin bed at the back was all but invisible. It felt hotter up here, too, and muggy, as if the AC couldn't be bothered to climb the stairs. Spying an old box fan trapped between a chair with no seat and two stacked boxes labeled, curiously, Paul and Pearl, he shifted the refuse until he could plug it in. A powerful breeze followed, loud and hot as a hairdryer. He plugged his phone into the same outlet, realizing there was almost no signal and no Wi-Fi whatsoever. Egg swore under his breath. Sure, he had brought plenty of art supplies, which would suffice as entertainment, but how would he get any illustrations to Jay without an internet connection? It's not like he could just walk to the library anymore, not when the nearest facility was 20-something miles away. But that was a problem for another day. If he planned to reach the bed by sundown, he would have to begin the long process of decluttering. He surveyed the junk pile. The fatigue and lingering cramp of air travel hardly boosted his motivation. With a sigh born equally of tiredness and dismay at the immensity of the task before him, he decided to begin by eliminating the boxes, thinking he might at the very least create a serviceable walkway. Egg pulled the nearest one toward him, the one marked Pearl. It was taped shut, but the tape must have been opened a few times because it curled tantalizingly at the edges and pulled away easily. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Emily. If you guys have questions for Emily, you can drop them into the chat or raise your hand and we will catch you. Yeah, I'll get us started though.
Okay.
So Egg's Kentucky farm is based on a real hilltop, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about how you go about making a real place a fictional place. How do you decide what aspects to keep and what to leave behind?
Good question. So much of this specific farm was real. Like the house is kind of incongruous as the one described in the book, like the big windows overlooking these steep hillsides, the driveway that winds around the property. So a lot of that is real. Sort of the situation of the hilltop within the larger community is a little more fictional. The town where some of the other activities in the book takes place, named Hale Creek, is also fictional, but based on some places I know from having visited Kentucky and having family that lives down there. But the farm on the hilltop was the one place I always spent the most time and have the most vivid memories of as a child. And it really just brought to life this bucolic setting and a place of sort of mystery where like these hills are almost so steep you can't even really walk down them very well. So you're sort of almost limited to the farm on the top of the hill. And then you see the landscape beyond, but can't enter it. And I think that's sort of where the idea for like this species that was kind of hiding out there came from.
There's kind of a stickiness feeling, like a sticky feeling as he comes to the farm, right? The way the hot
Mm-hmm.
air like slaps him in the face. I really like that detail.
Yes, I almost always go there in summer. I don't know if I've ever been to Kentucky in the winter, so it tends to be very hot and humid. I'm from the north. I live in Wisconsin. I grew up in Ohio, so it always seemed hotter in Kentucky than anywhere else I lived.
I don't believe anybody who says that dry heat is worse than a like a humid heat. Yeah, it's way
Yeah.
worse. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look, see if anybody's got a question. And humid. Yeah.
Yep, very
All
humid.
right. Blog. Yeah, here we go. Thomas Richards has one. Um, I read some positive reader reviews and congratulations. There are many positive comments. Before publishing your work, did you go through a period of submission and receiving rejections? And if so, can you share that experience with us? Specifically, how did you cross over the bridge to publication after the rejections?
Absolutely. Great question. And yes, I went through a very long period of submissions and rejections. I'm assuming this viewer has some familiarity with the publishing side and the writing side, perhaps. I've submitted several books for consideration to agents and publishers and have published only a subset of those. So, for anyone who's interested, I submitted to loads and loads of agents and didn't really find a home for this book or the first one I published. Both of my novels, I found opportunities to submit directly to the publishers for their annual awards for different opportunities. Both opportunities were more environmental leaning, which is where my writing happens. So I think it was a combination of just finding the right fit for the work that I do. Because I also submitted to loads of other indie publishers with open submission periods. But I've tend to find with all my writing, both like novels and like short form essays and stories, that the places that prefer ecologically focused writing tend to like my work versus maybe some of the more traditional or like purely literary leaning outlets are a little harder for me to find placement. So in my experience, just finding the right home for the work is the most important step, because once you've found that home, the people behind it can be such amazing champions of that work. And that's really what you want, to find this match where the people who want to publish and champion the work are enthusiastic, and it just makes the partnership that much more successful.
I'm actually going to follow up on that. So
Mhm.
it sounds kind of like your first novel and then this one maybe weren't the first ones that you wrote and submitted. Is that the case?
Yes, that is the case. I before I wrote these two, the first two, which are both adult literary fiction, I wrote two separate trilogies. So I actually wrote 6 books before I wrote either of these two, and neither of those were picked up. Um, so I'm still considering maybe, self-publishing or doing something else with at least one of those trilogies in the future. But yeah, I wrote several books before either of these were accepted.
Do you think or what can you say that you learned over the course of writing these books that allowed the next ones to get published?
Um,
Not meant to be a trick question.
no, totally. I think there's always this idea of like the author finding their voice, which sounds kind of like vague and ethereal, but um, I think when you're more junior or novice writer, you absorb a lot of like what you've read, and so maybe you're channeling more of like these other authors' ideas or their voice, and then once you've had enough experience kind of developing your own world and your own characters, um, you can kind of venture out on your own a little bit more and rely less on other people's experience to craft your work. So that was definitely something I learned in writing those first trilogies. I also learned a lot about the submission process, like we just talked about, and kind of the amount of work that just goes into like developing a query letter that you send to agents and learning to pitch your work and condense it down into a synopsis. So some of those more technical aspects of the writing world were something I got a lot of experience in. And you also, um, probably after many, if not hundreds of rejections, kind of build up that resilience to rejection and realize it really, like, these rejection letters always say, oh, it's a very subjective business, like don't take it personally. But I think that you internalize that part of it more as you get more rejections and find people who do like your work. Like I said before, once you find the right place, then it feels, I see someone else had had that question. The rejections I think are always defeating because it's, then you got to try again and try again. But I think um, once you've had like one or two successes, and I don't mean necessarily publishing a book, but even, publishing a small piece in a journal you respect, or in a magazine or a local newspaper, or if you have a blog that you write on and people come to read your work, those little successes and glimmers of hope help you try for the next success. And when it comes to finding an agent or a publisher, I try to keep the mindset that like, well, if that person or that publisher didn't like my work, that wasn't going to be the right fit for me anyway. So you want to have the people who are enthusiastic about your work, and sometimes it takes sending 100 query letters until you find the right person. That was sort of my stopping point for anyone who's interested. I would send 100 query letters, and if I wasn't getting any offers, then I would kind of like think about what the next step would be for the piece, whether it needed to be revised or if I wasn't using the right pitch or whatever it was. So I just keep keep trying.
Okay. I'm going to do one question from the chat, and then Christy has her hand raised. Okay, so this question comes from Taylor Broby. He says, "Thank you so much for magical reading, Emily. I'm curious if you could talk about how you navigate complicated character relationships infused with humor. I found myself both laughing and cringing in a good way due to family relationships while listening to you read. How do you strike that balance?"
That's a great question. I think to some extent the characters, they're not really based on real people, but and I'm trying to think the best way to answer this, but I'll start in a different way. I like to bring humor into my work mostly for myself, because when I read literary fiction, it tends to deal with a lot of, difficult themes or difficult family relationships. And especially I like to read for some escapism, also to learn things, but like I like to add just a little bit of levity and make people's days a little bit brighter. And it just makes it nicer for me to write as well if the whole thing isn't too like dark or overwhelmed by like difficult themes. Like in this one, the themes are immigration and species extinction, which can be like very difficult or charged topics. So I think kind of adding that lightness or that humor helps counteract those elements. I started writing, wanting to be a novelist when I was in my 20s, I guess. So I started off writing about younger people. So in this case, Egg is 16. In my first book, the main character was a young 30-year-old woman. So I think sort of that recency of my own youth and growing up feeds into a lot of how Egg feels. I can remember what it's like, when your parents ask you to do something that you don't want to do, whether it's cleaning out your grandfather's attic or spending the summer away from your friends. So I think my own experiences feed a lot into the younger perspectives in my writing. And the older one, sort of the cantankerous relationship or the cantankerous old character of Opa, is sort of based on people I've known. I also dedicated the book to my uncle, who was an Indonesian immigrant to the United States. So a lot of his immigration story comes into play in this work. And I didn't know him super well. He passed away when I was younger, but sort of his voice and attitude plays a little bit into Opa's personality in this book as well. So I tend to bring in a lot of these elements from different places and braid those together to try and strike a balance between like humor and authenticity.
Thank you. Christy, you're up if you want to unmute and ask.
Hello. Hey, Emily. Thanks so much for this great reading. I actually also saw you at AWP. So,
oh, wonderful. Welcome back.
Yes. So I was wondering, I'm super interested in your science background, and I'm always fascinated by writers that do other things other than writing and thinking about writing and have other backgrounds professionally and otherwise. And I guess I'm wondering, my question is actually kind of similar to Catherine's. Like, how do you see your scientific background? Kind of like, how does that influence or shape your relationship to writing? And of course, like the way that it comes out in the work?
Awesome. Yeah. So for one thing, with my background in medical research, I tend to rely a lot on like sources and references. So you'll see I have a long list of references in this book. So when it comes to writing about the species they discover on the farm here and the scientists that come to study it, a lot of the information surrounding that part of the book was based on like scientific work that's actually been done in birds elsewhere, whether it's in the United States or further afield, including a lot of the technologies they use, and the process for like publishing the work and submitting grants, all that sort of administrative stuff very briefly is mentioned in the novel. I always like to say in my biography, my about me statements that my work is also influenced by my background in science, because I think it gives me sort of a different perspective than a lot of other authors who may come at writing novels from more of like a creative writing background or a background in English or whatever. So basically all of my work either has a character who is a scientist or works in medicine or has some relationship to that world. The next book I'm working on explores ideas about ethics of animal testing and human clinical trials. So it's even more centralized in that book. So I'd say my background in science and medicine is really a foundation for a lot of what I do, both in structuring the novel and researching the work and developing the characters in the works themselves.
That kind of, Christy touched on Catherine's question, and Catherine says, beautiful reading, Emily. I appreciate how you talk about aiming to communicate science-based knowledge through storytelling. Can you share how you see that working in this book?
Yes. So in this story, Egg discovers a bird species that was thought to be extinct back in the 1930s, living on Opa's farm, and how it came to be there is talked about in the novel. I won't give that part away, but in order to confirm this is a bird that is supposed to be somewhere else that they thought was extinct, a team from the East Coast comes to do field work on the farm. So there's a team of a lead investigator, postdoc, a graduate student, two graduate students working on this project on the farm, and they all sort of become friendly with Egg. So he has, and he actually ends up volunteering with them to help them do some of their field work. So there really is this very close relationship between Egg and the scientist. So I'd say that that's probably where the science element comes most strongly into play here.
We have a question from Joshua Salmons. He wants to know, how did you come to choose the setting, a remote hilltop in Kentucky, to explore the hybridity of different worlds, Indonesia and Appalachia?
That's great. So aside from, just having familiarity with that specific hilltop and the house and the farm there, I like to write novels that are set in places I have a lot of familiarity with, because so much of my writing is environmentally focused. There's a lot of imagery about the landscape and the plants and animals that live there, and the seasonality of wildlife, or how the weather changes and what it's like to be there throughout the year. So I wanted to choose, in this case, Kentucky, and having it being a remote location where you might find something, a wild animal that you wouldn't expect, because it's extremely rural. There are a lot of unexplored areas, especially as you would head more deeply into Appalachia further east. So Kentucky felt like the perfect place to set this book.
Thank you. Now that you've been talking about it, I actually reminded about an article that came out in the Hedgehog Review, I think it was last week, arguing that the way to think about saving the planet is to focus on these small places, the places that we know intimately. And I think your work on this Kentucky hilltop is exemplifying that. I'm just wondering if you have an opinion on that idea.
I have a strong opinion on that. I also write a weekly Substack, if anyone's interested, called The Outsider. That's all about exploring your local wildlife and becoming more intimately connected with the place that you live. Because I think once you learn to care about the landscape where you live and become more actively involved in, caring about your one little corner of the world. Well, if everybody felt that way, then, there's carers all over the globe. So I know we're always bombarded with the ideas of influencers who can influence everyone around the world. But I think being able to participate in a more local way is more achievable for most people. And gives you more of a sense of like immediate impact where, you know, if you're volunteering, we'll say in your community doing land stewardship or something like that, not only are you getting to know the plants and animals and ecosystems where you live, but you also have like a noticeable immediate visual impact in your own community. So I always advise people to start local.
Thank you. Any other questions? Diane, I can see you moving. Okay. Diane says, hearing you read reminded me of so many things I loved in this novel. The humor, the dialogue, the family. Thank you. Can you talk about the research into Opa's background? That was fascinating.
Yeah, that was another one where I really had to do some deep diving because I've not been to Indonesia, and the my late uncle passed away when I was quite young, so I didn't learn really anything from him about his background. So it was actually his son, my cousin, who sort of went looking for answers about where his dad came from and how he came to be here, because he had been quite secretive about it and didn't really share that story with anyone. And he passed away without many people knowing how he came to be in the American Midwest after growing up on the Indonesian archipelago. So I did a couple interviews with my cousin after he traced his family back to West Sumatra. And so the village that Opa is from in the novel is the same village that Opa that my uncle is from in real life. So with that starting point, and given the decade in which he would have been traveling, I sort of built this fictional story around that starting point, imagining how and why Opa would have traveled from West Sumatra through Indonesia. He settles in Jakarta for a while, which you hear about in the novel, and what would have driven him from Indonesia all the way to America. So in addition to doing some of these interviews, I read a lot of history about the decade Indonesia's work towards independence and sort of the reformations that happened after that, and their how they were kind of tossed around between the communist powers in East Asia and like the US influence. So there were these political issues that came into play as well, and imagining how those would impact, you know, just sort of an everyday person who was living in the city at that time, and what might have happened to drive them from their home and seek refuge elsewhere.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. If you have them, drop them in the chat. I'm going to throw one at Emily while we're waiting. So Egg and Opa both start this novel out fairly isolated, both both emotionally, but definitely physically in the beginning up on that hilltop. And I'm wondering how you go about creating community for both those characters, and if that translates into your other work.
Let's see. So I think one example would be when shortly after Egg arrives, he helps Opa at the weekend farmers market, and he sort of observes that Opa has this community in town. People actually really like him, and Egg doesn't really like think too much about it, but it maybe gives this alternate viewpoint of his grandfather that he never got from his mother. His mother and his grandfather have this estranged relationship, but he's pretty well liked in town. So he sees that there's that element of community that already exists there. And then Egg is kind of pulled out of his isolation. At the same farmer's market, he meets a local girl named Faith, and they become friendly. And kind of through her introduction to other people in town and some of the events that happen there over the summer, he starts to come out of his shell and make some other friends. And so they're sort of building these friendships or communities independently. And I think as they kind of become more comfortable with each other and like spending time together, they grow closer together throughout the novel.
I think it's really, I mean, what I really enjoy is that there's this idea that Opa, his kids see him as isolated, but he has this whole other community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of Egg's journey too, in discovering this place is the people that live there. And then
Yeah.
also the way the scientists are kind of swept up into it and become part of it too. It's really well done.
Thank you. Well, and of course, that's kind of that ends up kind of being how they resolve that issue with the house sale. It's Opa's.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a couple more questions in the chat. This one's from Thomas. He says, for readers who aren't well informed about your work, can you give a thumbnail overview of the two works and contrast them thematically and otherwise characterizations? And what would be the best of the books to begin with to get acquainted with your writing? Also, can you name one or two writers that you like? I think is the question.
Oh, absolutely. I'll start with the second one, other writers. I love Barbara Kingsolver. Of course, you'll probably see a lot of kind of like similar tonality, and with like the rural setting with a lot of her work. I really like Ian McEwan. He's a British author, but he wrote Atonement. People might be familiar with that film. But I love his style. He's just such a skilled novelist. I'm so envious of his ability. I love Robin Wall Kimmerer, who doesn't, if you haven't read her work, you need to become acquainted with it. It'll bring you so much peace. And, but to answer the original question, my first novel, Michi Kusa House, is also a very personal book to me. It was based thematically on my recovery from decades of eating disorders and how I sort of overcame that by learning to connect with the land and become interested in farming and seasonality. And so it's also a novel that's set in, the Midwest, the Great Lakes region in Ohio, where I grew up. But then the main character, Winona, also travels to Japan, which is one of my favorite places in the world. So you get this sort of these dual timelines and these dual locations in the book. So those aspects of the two books, both Michi Kusa House and Cupido Cupido, are very similar. To become acquainted with the work or my writing, either of the books are a great introduction. They're quite similar in style and tone. Winona's a little older than Egg. So I'd say there's less humor in Michi Kusa House, but it was meant to be a very peaceful and calming read. So even though she's sort of overcoming these mental health issues, I didn't want to dwell on kind of the darker sides of recovery. So it's meant to be more of an uplifting story.
Okay. We have one more question from Joshua Salmons. He says, you have several mediums through which the characters have to navigate: language, culture, and generation. Would you be willing to share a little insight in how you may have developed dialogue through these mediums?
Well, let's see. Well, the dialogue that on Opa's side of things, I think is the most I don't know what the right word is, like different in terms of like the language structure and the words that he uses, which is based on conversations I had with my uncle and sort of like the tenses, the vocabulary, and then I had that cross-checked with members of the family to make sure I got it right and it wasn't stereotyping in any way. For the culture and language of the other characters, like Egg, I had to tap a little bit more into a slightly younger mindset, but and of course he's Canadian and not American, so there was a little bit of, I just did some research there because they use some different words than we do for things like the washroom instead of the bathroom or the restroom, just like basic terminology things. And let's see. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but I hope that helps, gives us a few ideas of where the dialogue comes from.
Diane says to tell you that she appreciates uplifting stories.
Thank you. So
I think we all do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all need a
Yeah.
few of those right now and always.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it for tonight. I'm dropping the link into the chat one more time in case you haven't pre-ordered the book yet, which you should definitely do. Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate you setting up the event. It was so
Yeah.
much fun.
It's been so great to have you. Everybody, a round of applause for Emily. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Please take care. Good night. Shelby, I see you with Mac.
Yeah, he was being a butt.
He's very cute.
Thanks.